after the kirtan, Prabhupada would say the Jayadwani prayers, and then he would begin his class. He had this big Sanskrit book in front of him, like that thick, opened. And at that time I didn't know that it was, that Srila Gurudev has sent him those books. Prabhupada asked him, he wrote so many letters, perhaps you've seen the letters book called Letters from America, where Prabhupada was requesting him to send kartals and mridangas and what else, books. So Gurudev told us some 30 years later that Prabhupada's books were all full of chemicals to preserve them. So Gurudev had to get them from all those chemicals, and he even got sick at that time. I mean, he didn't really get sick because he's a pure devotee, but he did the human-like pastime of getting sick from dealing with all the chemicals, but it just showed his sacrifice even before most of us were born. I mean, a lot of you weren't even born yet, and none of us were born in Krishna consciousness yet. And Gurudev would sometimes mention that he sent Prabhupada pedas from Vrindavan. It's a very nice sweet. And one day Prabhupada offered us those pedas. He offered some Indians who came to see him, and the Indians put it to their head and then honored it. So Prabhupada looked at me and then motioned with his eyes that I should look at the Indian guests to see how they were very respectful to the prasadam. So how did I start the painting? Well, first, when I first came, you all, I think, are familiar with the 26 Second Avenue Temple. How many of you have? It looks like most of you have been there. So you know it's a long, skinny room. So when you first come in from the front, there was a printing press, an offset printing press there, which was about that big, that high, and you crank it to make the books come out. So at that time, Prabhupada was printing his Back to Godhead magazine. And after lunch, the devotees would collate the pages. Let's say there were 32 pages. So they'd have all the piles, and the devotees would collate it, somebody would staple it, and then often the devotees would go out to either in the streets up to 8th Street and going from east to west on 8th Street when it was so crowded, where it was so crowded, or sometimes they would go to theaters, and we would give out Back to Godhead magazines in the theaters, I mean on the theater lines as people were waiting to go in. And especially, there was one popular, I don't know if it was a movie or a theater performance at that time called Hair, which was about how somebody became a Hare Krishna devotee, so it was perfect. And or at least Hare Krishna was in the movie somewhere. So that was very easy for us to distribute Back to Godhead magazines. And the devotees took out this big round drum that hangs from the neck, and you just bang it with this big thing with like a soft ball at the end of it. So we would go out during the day like that and night like that. And one day, I was there for a few weeks, and one day one of the brahmacharis asked me that Swamiji wants to know what kind of talent you had. So I said, well, I consider myself an artist, but the only showing of my art was in school. I went to City College of New York, and I brought a friend with me who asked which one was mine of all the students. I said, well, which is the worst one? I couldn't imagine that he would have picked mine, but he did. So that's how good an artist I was at the time. So I said, well, I guess you could say I'm an artist. So then he told Prabhupada, and Prabhupada immediately called me to his quarters, and he told me to be like Mirabai. I don't know if you know Mirabai. She didn't want to marry anybody but Krishna even when she was married. And then finally her in-laws gave her poison, but she wasn't affected by it, but she just left and nobody knew where she went. So Prabhupada told me to be like Mirabai at that time. And then one day a man came, an importer, and he gave Prabhupada this deity of Madan Mohan, who later on, some years later, went to I think the Washington, D.C. temple, or the Gita Nagari, I forget which one, and Prabhupada sent to Radharani. He's black, and I think Radharani's golden. Does anybody ever see him? Either Washington, D.C. or Gita Nagari. But he was there alone, Madan Mohan, and Prabhupada asked me to paint him, so I was painting him up in Prabhupada's quarters. And that importer also gave me a bunch of like fake glass jewelry from India. So I gave it to Prabhupada and he said the gopis used to wear this. So Prabhupada took the ornaments and threw it across the room. And he said the gopis would never touch this. First cheap, and second of all, made of matter, made of material. So the first painting Prabhupada had me do was, he gave me a picture of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan dancing at Srivas Angam, which is the courtyard of Mahaprabhu's associate named Srivas Thakur in Navadvip. And so I was painting downstairs wearing tight black jeans and a tight black turtleneck, which incidentally I wore at my initiation, which was I think around November of '66, about a month after I joined. And I was initiated with one other devotee, Rupanuga, and at that time I didn't know Prabhupada's Pranam mantra, Namo Vishnu Padaya. So Prabhupada told me to bow down, but I didn't know his mantra. So he said Nama, and then I said Nama. He said Om, Om Vishnu Padaya. So it was like that. He was so tolerant and so encouraging all the time. You know how just like a parent is encouraging to his or her newborn baby child, and anything the child does, the parent says, oh, how wonderful, oh, how intelligent, oh, you did that so good. So Prabhupada was like that too. And he would even talk about me in classes, which made me feel so good. Like he was giving one analogy in a morning class at 26 2nd Avenue when he said, trying to show how the first verse or the invocation to Isopanishad, which says that the absolute truth is perfect and complete, and although so many complete units emanate from him, like this cosmic manifestation, he remains the complete balance. In other words, 1 + 1 = 1 and 1 - 1 = 1. So he said, just like the sun, it's been emanating heat and light since the beginning of time, and it hasn't gotten any colder and darker. Just like our Jadharani, she is painting so many pictures of Krishna, but she didn't become less by painting. So he used me in that analogy in speaking about how Krishna's unlimited and his energies are ever emanating from him, and he never becomes less. In fact, he becomes more. He's always increasing. So the first painting I did was that Sankirtan painting, and I was painting it downstairs in the temple room. So one day, Prabhupada came down, and the picture was actually quite terrible. I even saw it a couple of days ago in Alachua. Sometimes you'd have half a body with nothing from his hair down. It was just like the floor. Or somebody just had a head and no shoulders.